Good evening. Greetings. We are grateful you've joined us for this event, which is part of our ongoing series called Arrington Conversations. As an outgrowth of the Leonard J. Arrington Chair of Mormon History and Culture here at USU, Arrington Conversations provide an opportunity for prominent individuals from various walks of life to come to campus and talk about the ways that religion makes a positive impact on society. Many of you will remember last year's inaugural Arrington Conversation featuring film and television director Dallas Jenkins. We're excited to announce 2 Arrington Conversation events for the next academic year. In the fall, we'll host an online event with Father James Martin, one of the nation's most prominent religious writers and commentators. And in the spring, we'll host New York Times columnist Ross Douthat for an event here on campus. Be sure to look for announcements about these upcoming events. I want to thank the donors who've made this event possible. As a public university, we rely on the generous support of friends who provide the means by which we can host events like this and make them free and open not only to our students, faculty, and staff, but also to the general public. I also want to acknowledge that as a land-grant institution, Utah State University campuses and centers reside and operate on the territories of the 8 tribes of Utah, who've been living, working, and residing on this land from time immemorial. These tribes are the Confederated Tribes of the Goshute Indians, Navajo Nation, Ute Indian Tribe, Northwestern Band of Shoshone, Paiute Indian Tribe of Utah, San Juan Southern Paiute, Skull Valley Band of Goshute, and White Mesa Band of the Ute Mountain Ute. We acknowledge these lands carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. We recognize elders past and present as peoples who've cared for and continue to care for the land. In offering this land acknowledgement, we affirm indigenous self-governance, history, experiences, and resiliency of the Native people who are still here today. Our 2 participants in the conversation this evening are Patrick Mason, Professor of Religious Studies and History here at USU, where he holds the Leonard J. Arrington Chair in Mormon History and Culture. Educated at Brigham Young University and the University of Notre Dame, he's the author or editor of numerous books and articles, primarily about Latter-day Saint history, culture, and theology. He's also frequently consulted by local, national, and international media on stories related to the LDS Church and the broader Mormon culture. Within the College of Humanities and Social Sciences, Professor Mason has been part of a team of faculty and administrators who've envisioned the newly created Harvey Peace Institute, which seeks to train students in the knowledge and skills necessary to become peace builders in our communities, nation, and the wider world. Our special guest tonight, Sharon Eubank, is Director of Humanitarian Services for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. In addition to overseeing the church's global humanitarian efforts, which expenditures totaled just over $1 billion in 2022, she also oversees the church's Perpetual Education Fund and Just Serve initiative. A California native, Eubank served as a full-time missionary for the church in Finland before completing a bachelor's degree in English from Brigham Young University. She lived in Japan teaching English as a second language, then worked as a legislative aide in the U.S. Senate before moving to Provo and opening a retail education store there. Eubank has worked for the church's Welfare and Self-Reliance Department since 1998. She was named director of the church's worldwide humanitarian efforts in 2011. On top of that work, She served as first counselor in the church's General Relief Society presidency from 2017 to 22, where she became one of the most popular and admired women within Latter-day Saint culture. Please welcome our discussants.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you all for coming tonight, and thank you especially to Sharon for being here and braving the Great White North up here in Logan.
Well, I got to understand that I'm popular and admired. I'd never heard that before in my introduction. So.
I told her that was my addition to the bio. That's not part of the official bio. That's my humble opinion about your status. Well, we're thrilled to have you here tonight. We're excited for this conversation, and then you'll have an opportunity later on to ask your own questions of Sharon after I've done so. Do you mind advancing one screen? So here's a QR code. If you'd like, you can scan this onto your phone, and that should, if the technology works, that should bring up a form in which you can submit questions. And then through the wonders of technology, I will get those questions, and then I'll relay those to Sharon at the end of the night. We'll also post this QR code at the end of the evening, but you can pull it up now. So I'm thrilled, and let's just dive in. So for those, in addition, we just heard your bio, but for those who might not be totally familiar with all of your professional or personal background, what got you to the point, what prepared you in your life to the point where you could take over in 2011 as Director of Humanitarian Services for the church? What got you to where you are today?
It's such a loaded question because I came to the church on a 6-month contract in 1998. That was 25 years ago. I have gone out on a limb for this audience because I trust you, and I'm going to show you some really ugly pictures. Which I regret even having been taken, but here they are. I can't see these from here, but hopefully you can. My first job after graduating from my English as a second language degree, I accepted a job at a school in Japan. And I'm just going to be frank, I accepted it because in the 80s, you could make a lot of money teaching English as a second language in Asia. And I needed to, pay off my school debts. And I worked for the woman who's standing next to me there. She was the principal of the school, and those other 2 women were her sisters. But I did not realize until after I accepted this job. It was in a small town, Suzuka. It's the birthplace of Honda. And so a lot of my students were getting ready to be transferred by Honda to Ohio or Australia or London, and they were going to have to be immersed in English. So I was kind of their crash course, and Honda was paying for the course. They needed very specific curriculum, but there was no curriculum at the school. So every day I'm just scrambling to figure out what do we do to help these individual students. And every day was just what do I do now? But I finally realized in the middle of the semester that the other 2 women, they ran a catering business. And every morning they got up and chopped vegetables. This was the thing they did every morning. And it dawned on me, you got to chop vegetables. You got to get up every morning and prepare for the rest of the day. So my little notice to you up there, it says, every day you got to prepare. It's got to take preparation. So that's what I took away from that discussion. Get ready. Here's another ugly picture. After I came back from Japan, I moved to Washington, D.C. I did not have a job, and through a very ridiculous way, I got hired because I could type 56 words a minute instead of 55, which sounds very old-fashioned right now. But I was working in the Senate office inside the Capitol. So if you visit the Capitol, there's the rotunda with all those statues and everything. And the Republican whip, who was the senator I worked for, had an office just off the rotunda there. So I got to work in the Capitol. We got to see Lech Walesa and Queen Elizabeth and Benazir Bhutto and all of these world leaders come across. And this is a picture of me in a mistakenly bad crocheted vest, which nobody should wear, meeting with the former President Bush. And I loved what I got to do there, but what I learned that was different from my university education in Washington, D.C. was it's not about win or take all. It's not, you've got to find ways that everybody can win at something. That's how government works, it's how society works, and that was really helpful to me. So this picture is of me, again, please don't judge. I opened that toy store in Provo. It was an educational toy and teacher supply. And the thing that I loved about the store was I was in charge. There was nobody to be able to say, well, I'll go ask, we've got to see if we can get approval or permission. The buck stopped with me, and I really loved that part of my career. But what I learned from that experience was I didn't have any cash. I used all my cash on the store. So I had to find solutions that didn't in Utah, which they had been saving, and they sent it by train load to San Francisco to make bread. So that was one of the first instances where we, in kind of a global way, a Western way, did some of that work. This is a picture of a terrible famine that was happening in 1908 in China. And again, the Relief Society sent its wheat across on an ocean liner to be able to stave off some of that. So there were some roots in the beginning. But you're right. How old were you in 1985 when that was happening?
I would have been 9.
Okay. So there's a little bit of a difference in our age here. I was a missionary during 1985, but you had a lot of, you had Michael Jackson and
Right.
rock stars giving concerts for what was happening. There was a BBC film producer, and he went to Ethiopia, and he shot 7 minutes full of film, and he called it a biblical famine, because people were in the act of starving to death. They were taking bodies out of the camp every single day, and in a time before we would say it went viral, every news agency picked that up, and it was spread across the world. And so people were very interested, what can we do? And members of the Church of Jesus Christ were writing to headquarters and saying, what could we do? And so in our tradition, we had a fast. So President Kimball at the time wrote to the church everywhere and said, on the Sunday in January, we're going to fast, and all the money that's collected on that Sunday, we will apply to famine relief in East Africa. And then later in that year, President Reagan also asked, I don't know where he got the idea, but he said fast and people would donate their money. And so the church fasted a second time and $4 million was raised. So they have $10 million without a way of really knowing what to do. So the very youngest apostle, President M. Russell Ballard, was taken, and he went, I know he's the oldest now. But there he is in that camp, and he had some really specific experiences. And we worked with some of our oldest partners. Catholic Relief Services was the one we went to, and they said, look, we'll show you what to do. We'll show you how to do a world-class
They'd been doing it for a
famine
while.
relief. They were there and had been doing it for a long time. And we learned a lot of things from them, and that's really how it started. They thought they'd spend the $10 million and it would go away, but people continued to give money. And so in the early 90s, a decision was made, we're going to have a humanitarian part of our outreach that is permanent. And that's what you remember, saving your money for and doing some of those things. And so I was just in Ethiopia, as you mentioned just a couple weeks ago, and the ability to see the 40-year trajectory of some of that work was really interesting to me, and to see some of the partners that we've worked with over that 40-year time, and to see, unfortunately, another famine that is on the brink, and what the things can do, and it made me appreciate the maturity of what we've learned over that time.
Yeah. So you've talked about this, so now a 40-year effort, 30 years since the early 1990s. And so can you give us a sense of the scale of where the humanitarian services for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is at today in 2022, 2023?
I could answer that question in a lot of ways. I'm going to show you the statistics that were just published last week in our
annual report,
right? And
yeah.
it was just mentioned. But these statistics represent something different, I think. So let me just show you. So this says over $1.2 billion expended last year across humanitarian and other ways of caring for people in need. But that just doesn't, think about the small donations that make up that amount of money and the trust that people have to give that kind of a thing. 6.8 million volunteer hours. I won't ask you to raise your hands, but if you volunteered in the last year and you did it for a couple hours, maybe you're part of that total. That represents a lot of energy and work that was given freely, by people. The 190 countries kind of represents the scope of what we've done, and the almost 4,000 individual projects. There's a lot of work that goes into that. And it's certainly not everything that we've done, but there's a little bit of the scope involved.
Yeah. So where does that fit? You mentioned early on learning from Catholic Relief Services and so forth. So where does this, those are big numbers, right? But it's an even bigger world with a lot of need. Yeah. So how does the work of the Humanitarian Services, how does it fit in with, how do you partner with other groups, religious, secular, governmental, non-governmental? What do those partnerships look like?
As a faith-based organization, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is probably medium-sized. There are others that are much bigger, but we're unique in one very special way, and it's in our funding. There are really only a handful of pots of money that people are drawing in. So you've got, large philanthropist funds like the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. You've got national organizations like USAID or AusAid or DFID, that are representing the interests of a nation in humanitarian work. And then you've got the United Nations that works by fundraising, but also dues from its members, that is trying to coordinate across nations and countries. And they all bring different things to the table. But the church, even as a mid-sized humanitarian organization, comes in with its own funding. Almost every other group, although they do a little bit of fundraising from their members, they are tapping into those bigger funds and they become the implementing organizations. And so because the church is not doing that, because it has chosen to be self-funded in the way that we are, it allows us to be neutral, to be a convener, and to maybe punch a little bit above our weight in some of these ways, so that an organization like the World Food Program, when we made a donation last year, it was $32 million, they said this is the largest private donation that we've ever received, even though they are the World Food Program and big that way. So it allows us to do some things that we wouldn't be able to do maybe otherwise.
Mm-hmm. And how do you choose what to do, right? What are the set of principles upon which you, because again, so much need, big world out there, lots of other organizations in the field. How do you make those choices?
So we make choices based on, we're trying to serve the people who have the most vulnerability, and we have a specific priority on looking for places that are a little bit forgotten in the news. And this is we were talking about this earlier this evening, it's one of the problems about what's happening right now. The United Nations and those multilateral organizations are scaled to fund about 5 different crises at the same time, but we have about 15 crises going on at the same time. So you've got Afghanistan layered on top of the war in Ukraine, layered on top of the earthquake in Syria and Turkey, layered on whatever comes next, and that's just the last 6 months. That's just the last year. And so they are very worried about how can we work on these old crises when these new ones are coming. And so the church has a commitment that we'll try to look for those gaps where other people are not working and try to bring our convening ability into the places that might have been forgotten.
Yeah. So I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the church's philosophy behind the way that you approach these different things. And I know this gets complicated because there's so many actors out there, so many organizations doing this kind of work, and sometimes there are criticisms of the way that it's done. Sometimes relief aid can create dependency. Yeah. Sometimes there's a sense that relief organizations come in, they kind of parachute in, they've got a short-term project, and then they're out of there, right? And So there's also sometimes a critique of what's sometimes called like a white savior complex or white messiah complex, of Westerners coming in and going to Africa or some of these places that we're going to save you, right? So what are the philosophies behind the work that you do in humanitarian services, to choose how to do things, but how to do it well and how to do it right?
I hesitate showing these slides because it's a simplification, but it's a way to remember some of the principles that I think are important. So when I'm talking to students or people who are interested in asking that question that you've asked, I'm going to compare it to Uno. I'm going to use Uno because there's one question that's overridingly important, and then there's 4 other questions that I think will get us past the white savior, I'm here to help you, and into the best principles of what a good humanitarian project might look like. So here they are. So the first one is the thing that you have to remember, number 1 at all. What do the people themselves say they want? Don't go in with your preconceived, ideas or things that you've gathered that you're looking a home for. Sit down ahead of time and ask them, what is it you want? What have you tried in the past? What works? What are the gaps you have? How can I help? What is it that we can do together? And behind that question is the idea that I'm not the big beneficiary and you're the victim. This is going to be an exchange. We're going to learn from each other, and we're both benefiting from this in the same way. And that level of dignity, respect, paying attention to the choices that people say they want and actually do want, that's a principle, it's a core principle of my faith, that ability to choose and have agency, and it's a core principle of humanitarian work. So there's one way to put your foot right and start. But here are the other ones. So the next one is, I can't see these very well. But is what could the beneficiaries themselves do? Rather than say to somebody, you're too poor, you're too disabled, you're too whatever to be able to help, to respect them enough to say, what do you want to do to contribute? We're not going to, we're going to force them. It's not going to be work camp. Work will make you free. but it's what would you like to do to participate in this? And we want to get to know you, and you want to get to know us, so let's do something together. So there's that opportunity to do something. The next thing is, what could we invite the community and other people to do so that we're weaving social fabric back together, so that we're all participating in something that's local, that we all care about, or we want to learn to care about? What could we do as faiths, as municipalities, as schools? What could we do together on this specific issue that we've identified? And then this other one is important to me. It's a local solution that we can replicate. In other words, when we do this project, whatever we're going to do, does it make them stronger next time? Or did they just learn, Patrick Mason is so nice, he'll help me every time I ask for him. So you've got to figure out, what is it about this that we're going to design that we are stronger to solve the problem next time? And then the last one is it a local solution to a local problem? Without dissing anybody, I got a flyer on my door that said, we're collecting shoes for Afghanistan. Please put any shoes that you have of any kind into this bag and we'll come collect them. That's not a sustainable solution for Afghanistan. They have for years had a solution for shoes, and it didn't involve shipping my extra shoes in a shipping container over to them. It creates dependency. So what's the local solution that we can do here? Now, I'm in a lot of trouble with a lot of relief societies who love to make humanitarian supplies and then have them shipped across the world to other places. But 10 years ago, we made a decision. We're going to buy things locally and support the local market and allow the local community to put things together. And it's not as fun for us in Logan, but it's much better for them. So these are the 5 kind of easy principles to remember that I try to use in trying to find out what's a good project.
Yeah, so as you think about these, can you just give us a sense, maybe choose one project or something that you think has been really successful that meets these criteria, just off the top of your head maybe, or maybe one that you've recently seen on your travels to Africa or something like that?
Okay. I brought you these pictures, and I'll just jump into it.
Okay,
I was going to use them for something else, but they
Okay.
tell this story. So I was in Uganda and Ethiopia, and I was working with CARE. CARE got started when they were giving care packages after World War II to people who needed food. That's how they got started. But they are one of the finest organizations that I've personally worked with around the world, and they work in some of the hardest places. So what they have started up in Ethiopia is a village savings and loan program. So you have to commit to save 25 cents a week. So you come to a meeting like this, and the lockbox has 3 keys on it, and the president and the vice president and the treasurer all have a key to open that box, and people put their savings in that. And once you've done that, the group is 25 people. Once you've done that for 3 months, now you're eligible to borrow some of the savings back for a project that you want to do. So the group decides, which borrowers they're going to fund at which time, and then you can borrow up to 3 times what you've put in. So I'm just going to give you this example. This is the Tadessa family. They had been Village Savings and Loan for 7 years. So I went to visit them at their house, and they're very proud to show me what they've done. So this is them with their 2 children sitting out in the front. The first thing, they did their savings. The husband and the wife each had an account, but separate so they could control it. First thing they did with their first loan, they bought chickens. They bought 6 chickens and a little bit of chicken wire, and they got some instruction on how to grow chickens. Now they're getting 30 eggs a month, and they're tempted to sell them. But the wife said, I just learned in that class that when I'm pregnant, I should be eating protein. So they made a decision as a family. She would eat 20 of them, and they would sell 10. So they did. But this improves her health. They pay back their loan, and it was so successful, they said, all right, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to get goats. So they buy a goat, they fatten it up, and then they sell it at Easter time. So they'll probably keep that goat for a month or a couple months to get it fat. And they used their loan to buy the special feed to fatten up the goat. That was so successful that they bought beehives. So they now turned around and bought beehives. They had 14 beehives in the back. Now they're selling the honey, they're selling the comb. This has been a good business for them. So, I can't see what that photo is. Oh, they realized they had water on their property, but it wasn't potable water. So he hand dug 18 meters down to get the water to come up. And then there's a hand crank pump, which I pumped, and it wasn't very easy to get that water to come up. But he used it to be able to plant vegetables in the back, and they put hay on it to kind of keep them. And then he used it for, he planted fruit trees. So these are avocados that were growing there. Now they're eating those vegetables, they're selling those vegetables, and you can see the change that's happening in this family's life. So this is where they used to live, in that traditional hut, and then that's the new house that they built for themselves. Now this took 7 years, but look at the feeling that they had. In addition, the funding from Latter-day Saint Charities along with CARE, we helped establish 50 of these little chicken, I don't know what you want to call them, co-op? Not a co-op, like a market. So if you need to go buy feeders or feed or anything else, immunizations for your chicken, you go to this guy who's been trained, and he sells you those things, and he gives you counsel and advice. These were set up, 53 of these, by the funding that we provided. Here are the people who grow the chickens. So they've learned all about chickens, and there are 46 of these scattered around this part of Ethiopia. So you can see they're now building a value chain that supports those families in their ability. And instead of getting emergency food, now their ability to be able to, outside of the emergency, solve some of the issues that they had with a little bit of help from 2 organizations and their own savings and ingenuity. So the faces on that family, they had a big banner over their house, and it was a congratulations to their daughter who just graduated from pharmacy school. Are you kidding? 7 years it took them for that, but to me, that's an example of the kind of humanitarian you want to do, and you can see it in their faces. Because when I asked them, what are you going to do next? They're like, we're just going to keep doing what we're doing because it works for us. We're in great shape. We used to be in debt to the moneylenders every dry season, and now we're not. Now we know exactly what we're going to do. So that gives me a lot of hope. It's a good example.
Well, and you go kind of from relief to development,
yeah,
right?
You can see that trajectory in one family's life.
Yeah, that's phenomenal. So, so you've mentioned Relief Society, humanitarian kits. I don't want you to get you in any more trouble here.
Yeah.
Okay, but I think so. A lot of people here, in the audience, if they're Latter-day Saints here, I think people, and including me, very proud of the work that the church is doing on a general level, right? Those big numbers, I'm proud of that, right? I'm part of that organization. Part of my contributions go to that. But sometimes I hear a sentiment from people wanting to do something locally, right? Not just write a check, not just make a contribution, but what can we do in our local wards and stakes, especially in a place like Logan, where, yes, are there issues here? Certainly, to be sure, but not extreme poverty. We're fortunately very stable, safe, peaceful here, right? So what does humanitarian work look like in a place like Logan, Utah, for Latter-day Saints or other people who want to participate in this kind of work, but again, aren't going to Ethiopia?
I think this is the best question. I'm glad that you asked it, because everybody in the audience, even though we talk about Ethiopia or something else, everybody's asking that question. I wonder what I could do. And I think we do a disservice in Logan when we say, well, we don't have problems here, because we do have problems. They're just different than the ones in Ethiopia. And you know about some of them, and some of them are important. In an effort to weave social fabric back together after a time when we've been very polarized by faith and social issues and politics, the church tried to think, what could we do that would allow people to answer, what can I do? Because we're most powerful in the places where we live. We're here all the time. It's not just a week. We speak the language. We understand the culture. We're really powerful. It's not exotic. But this is where we have our greatest power. So one of the things that we launched 10 years ago is this platform called Just Serve. And the whole idea of Just Serve is to say, I'm going to match people who want to volunteer with a place that we can volunteer. So hoping that you would ask me this, I did this last night at 1:30 in the morning.
You said you go to bed at 8, so,
yeah, I know.
So she stayed up.
I woke up because I was worried about you. One of the great things about Just Serve is that it's free. There are other places, but you have to pay, to participate. It's open to anybody, and it exists in like 14 countries now, and we'll open 3 more countries this summer. But I like the idea of different faiths getting together to do something. So this is in Michigan, but that's the imam from the mosque, it's the evangelical bishop, and it's the Stake Relief Society president. I really like that they had fun, in the project that they were doing. But here's what I write. So I put in Utah State's zip code. You can call it up online or you can use your phone, but I put in the zip code, and it's going to search about opportunities 25-mile radius around you. You can put in different filters. Now, I selected 6, but I think there were 45 on the first page. So these are just some of the ones that I saw. I can't read from where I am. But they're kind of fun. So you could be a ballet usher on the 24th of April, and they need 3 more volunteers. That's the one on the bottom left. Up at the top, be a superhero of fun for the Circles Child and Youth Program. They need 3 more volunteers, and it's tomorrow. That motivates me. I'm going to sign up, and I'm going to send it to my sister and my roommate because we want to do that. Volunteer for income tax assistant. If you're a student here, maybe that's a skill that you want to provide. There's the community street outreach, going out and trying to find out where is the homeless population and to find out what is it that you need. When I've gone out with them, we'll take socks and underwear and bottled water and try and encourage them to come in for other services. Cache Valley Humanitarian Center, you can go look. They're looking for somebody to come on certain days of the week and give 2 hours of service. So if that fits your need. And then the diaper drive. They're always in need of diapers, and diapers is one of the greatest things. If you're a parent and you know how you go through diapers, or you just want to drop some diapers off, they give you the address to do those. So that's just some of the things that are around here. I'm a big proponent of local. I think we can do a lot of things. Doesn't matter if we're on vacation, what our job is, what our faith is, what our abilities are. There's always something we can do in our community that makes a difference. So I did that work for you at 1:30 in the morning, but you can do your own work if you want to.
No, that's fantastic, and I think that's what motivates people, right? And then it's not just writing a check, although that matters, right? But it's the personal connection. It's feeling like you're helping in your community, connecting with other people, right? That's what really matters.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to sort of step back a little bit. So the title of our event tonight was How Religion Alleviates Human Suffering, and I think we've seen a lot of that. But I know in your travels around the world that you've also encountered the flip side of this, that the religious ideas, religious people, religious institutions have sometimes been part of causing human suffering throughout human history. I mean, this is just kind of an unavoidable fact. And so how, and so that's led certain people to say, well, religion is part of the problem that needs to be solved. Right? I mean, that's what we need to remove from the equation so that we can go out and do good and make a better world. How do you respond to critics knowing that in fact, sometimes religion has been part of the problem?
Yeah, I hear that a lot. And I think you have to kind of unpack that question a little bit, because every group in any kind will have bad actors. They'll have people who made mistakes because of bad information, or they didn't act at their best. And we know all of that. But I think any organization or religion, let's just say faith, that is based on principles of dignity, unity, those things. I think my colleague Brett Sharps at the Brigham Young Law School, he says the best answer to extreme Islam is authentic Islam. It's existed for centuries, and it's the answer to the violence that is there. I think the answer to violent Christianity is authentic Christianity. And so those principles that exist at the very heart of religion that are so motivating and so comforting to so many people can be leveraged or mobilized to kind of regularize some of those bad actors that aren't really doing things. They may be doing it in the name of religion, but if they're using coercion and force, it stops being about religion right there. So I think we have the opportunity to live our faiths in such a way that it gives evidence that extreme is the exception, and that there is no other power. I hope I'm not overstating that, but I don't think there's any other power that can motivate people quickly enough to do the things that are good enough to actually change society.
Mm-hmm. You just taught a pretty good chunk of my course, Religion, Violence, and Peace. Religious Studies 1070, teaching it in the fall. Sign up for it.
Thank you.
No, I think that's exactly right. Okay, so we have a lot of students in the audience tonight. They're studying, they're training, they're looking forward to beginning their careers, and I know, I mean, one of the things that I love about teaching college students, especially right now, is they want to make a difference, right? They want to change the world. It's not just about making money, right? It's about, I want to go out and do something, yes, that of course provides, but also that makes a difference. And so, in light of all of this that you've presented, in light of all of the need in the world, what would you say to students who are at this point, getting the training they need, studying across, right, whatever college, whatever major they are, what can they do to keep this in mind, to really mobilize themselves, get the skills they need in order to make a difference in the world?
So I really feel like we overthink this. We make it as if it's too complicated. It's really the simplest thing, because you don't have to be the CEO of a humanitarian organization. You don't have to travel to another country. You don't have to have a ton of money. The things that have the biggest impact on people are things that you can do every single day in the place where you live. And it builds a civil society if it makes you a civil person. So these are 16 things that I wrote down last night that I think are helpful to you. All right.
You're thinking at a different level at 1:30 in the morning than I am.
It's either that or desperation, because I didn't learn. I have to stand over here to be able to do them. But all right, I love this idea of not wasting what other people need. We live in such an affluent society. We live like kings. But if we waste the very thing that other people need, there's something about the tenet of that says, I don't care about you. I care so little about you that I'm willing to waste the very thing that you need. Now that's a very complicated problem in the integrated world that we live in, but I'm committed to trying to live that in my everyday life. The other thing is to volunteer consistently. Most organizations, what we do is we'll deliver a sack of food, or we'll take a bunch of hygiene kits over to the pantry, or we'll do something at the school. What they crave is somebody to come every Tuesday and read from 2 to 3. They need to know that they can count on that person. And so if you want to take your volunteerism up a notch, it's that consistency that the organizations in Logan and around here, that's what they really crave. This idea of cultivating a sincere friendship with somebody who's younger or older than you, somebody who's in a different stage of life, I think is one of the most powerful things that's ever happened to me. And some of the best lessons I ever learned were people who were very different from me, but somehow reached out and we had a relationship. And I encourage you to do that. Talk to your mayor or city council and learn about their priorities. We had a mayor with us this evening, and I think any mayor, any city councilman would love for one of the citizens to sit down and say, what are your priorities for this year, and what help do you need from citizens? And then you'll have a game plan from there. It goes back to the number one question, what do you need? What do you want, and how can I help? All right, here's 4 more. Learn a skill or teach a skill. It helps us, we think of hobbies, we're always looking for something to do to relax and unwind. You can watch Netflix. I just finished 10 seasons of Doc Martin. But here's something else that you could do. Teach a skill or learn a skill. And then notice somebody who's on the edge and bring them to the center. This is so important in the 21st century. As we talk a lot about inclusion, but what are our actions and the evidence that show our inclusion? And I'm asking you that personally. All right, I'm stealing from President Monson, but never let a problem to be solved become more important than a person to be loved. I heard somewhere that there's no change without a significant relationship. There's no significant change without a significant relationship, and I believe that. In my 25 years of doing that, it's not about the stuff, it's not about the money, it's about the relationship that you have, that you sincerely care about that other person. That's when change happens. And then resolve a conflict in your life. Lay something aside. Try to bring the civility back into civil society and see what we can do. Here's 4 more. I had a colleague named Gustavo. He's from Guatemala. He brings salsa to every event because he wants people to enjoy it and have a good time. And every work group that Gustavo worked on, people loved it. They loved coming to work. They thought he was funny. He would quote movie lines and stretchy pants, and he did all kinds of things. I want to bring the fun of Gustavo to anything that I'm doing because life is full of stress and we don't need to be that stressed. I'm going to bring the salsa to everything that I do. I think you can pray for the people that you see on the news. There's that scripture in James that says the prayer of the effectual prayer of a righteous person availeth much. I may have butchered it a little bit. But that idea that I can see something that I can do nothing about, but I can exercise my faith and ask God to intervene on that, I believe there's power in that. Invite something from another faith or a viewpoint to do something with you. Is there anybody here from the Interfaith Club on campus? You're my people. This is an advertisement for you and your work. I've learned so much from celebrating Passover and iftars from Ramadan and gardens in the Baha'i faith and sharing my faith with other people. And I really love that opportunity. And then this idea of smiling in your liver. I think it was it happened in a yoga class that I was, but she said, you've got to smile so deep that your liver is smiling. Because then when your face isn't smiling, you still have that beneficent feeling toward other people. And it takes out the stress and the meanness that might be in your voice. You got to smile in your liver. And then make life accessible for everybody. We talked about bringing people in from the outside, but how come people aren't here that should be here? And let's go out and find them and find out why. And maybe it's a physical barrier, maybe it's an emotional barrier, a language barrier, a culture barrier, but let's do something about that and learn more about nutrition and food. The church's global priority is the well-being of children under 5, and this is one of the things that I spend a lot of my time thinking about, is nutrition and food. Some people don't have enough, other people have too much. How do we find the balance there? And then be proactive about emergency preparedness. I don't know what you would do if an earthquake the size that hit Turkey and Syria hit your house, but you're going to want your shoes, and you're going to want your passport, and you're going to want some cash, and some of those things. And I always try to think about what are the lessons that I just lived through in that emergency response that would apply to my own life. And then this last one is just pray for the Lord to send you someplace every single day. I believe in that. I believe that if we open our eyes to what is around us, we'll see things we never saw before. And if we can say to the Lord, here am I, send me, he'll send you someplace. And you can look back on your life and realize, I did something every single day that made me a humanitarian. Then you don't need the institution, you don't need the money, you don't need the exotic location. You're doing this every single day, and it becomes your character. And then I feel like then I'm living the way I ought to live.
Terrific. Okay, so I'm going to ask you one more question, then we'll turn it to the audience. Maybe if you can advance one more, I think it'll give them the code. Okay, so if you've thought of questions that you want to ask, you can submit it through this. So I want to ask you one more question before we turn it to them. So in your position, in your travels around the world, you've been forced or had the opportunity to confront suffering and pain and the results of violence and trauma in significant ways in refugee camps, or seeing children who aren't getting education. I mean, you go to starvation, famine, drought, these kinds of things. So what have you developed over the past 25 years? I know as I've talked sometimes to people who are out in the field, to peace builders or relief and development work, one of the things they talk about a lot is burnout, right? Just because of it, it does take something from you in order to give so much. So what have you developed over the past quarter century in terms of personal resources? What do you draw upon in order to avoid burnout, in order so that you still have more to give personally when you're seeing so much immense suffering in the world?
This is a really relevant question, not just about humanitarian work. I think it's about everything that we do.
Yeah, I mean, we can watch the news, we can all feel that sense of exhaustion, right?
For me, guilt isn't a productive emotion about this. I can't help where I was born any more than somebody can help where they were born. And it doesn't help to feel guilty about the things that I have when other people don't have. So I've tried to give myself a pass. Courage is a productive emotion. I think you can stand up for people, you can stand up for situations and do that, but guilt doesn't have anything. So I've decided I let go of guilt. That helps me. I had a colleague who in the Haiti earthquake went to a hospital and said, what can I do? And they said, look, you're 6'2" and you're strong, we need somebody. Can you just pick up people, and we don't have any gurneys, take them where they need to go. So all day long he picked up people, some of them were alive and some of them were dead, and they're dripping all kinds of bodily fluids, and he carried them to the morgue or he carried them to x-ray. He did that all day until his muscles were just shaking. But he didn't process the emotions of what that was like for him, and I think we need to take care of ourselves. You can't push yourself over and over and over again and not emotionally process the very difficult things that you've done. So if that's talking to a friend or somebody that you trust, or if it's counseling, or if it's a physical release or something else, we have to take care of ourselves that way. I want people to act and not be acted upon. I really believe in that. If you see something that bothers you and you want to do something about that, find a way to act, and then it doesn't rot inside you. And then the last thing I would say is there are some things that you can't do anything about. And you're going to have to turn that over to God and trust that He can make something out of that person's circumstance when you can't reach them. And you don't have to hold on to the bad feelings about that. You can turn it over to Him. He's been doing it for millennia. And just promise that you'll try and do the things that you can do something about. But as a Christian, as a Latter-day Saint, I take a lot of comfort in the fact that I'm not bearing this on my shoulders. Even my society isn't bearing it on their shoulders. There is one who is the Son of God who is bearing it all on His shoulders. And He suffered so that we wouldn't ever have to be alone in the unbelievable things that we are suffering on this earth. And that helps me. That kind of faith helps me.
Nice. Thank you. All right, let me turn to some of these from the audience, if that's okay with you. Some of them, I think, anticipated some of the things that we talked about. But this is a good question. They say, with any charitable giving or any humanitarian project, you inevitably run into local political, economic, social issues that you might not have been aware of before you went in, right? I mean, complicated situations, right? So how do you deal with that? How does humanitarian services deal with that? Any concrete examples that you can think of, good or bad, that they said?
This is the thing that I've tried to do personally. I try to get to know all the players as much as possible. Before you sit down and commit to funding, you're going to want to try and uncover some of those political things, because you can be taken advantage of, or there will be forces that you didn't know about, and so try to do your due diligence as best as you can. But then the second thing is, do a small project. And the project that comes to mind, well, do something small and kind of see what comes out of it before you commit to do something large. And then if you make a mistake, you just have to sometimes cut your losses. The example that I came up with is we did a wheelchair project with the government of Cape Verde. And the president of the country was running for re-election, and his wife commandeered the wheelchairs that were go to one island to go over to another island where her husband was not doing as well in the polls.
Needed some votes, right?
And we had a big discussion of what are we going to do about that? And we finally realized we're not going to create an international incident. We're not going to rip the wheelchairs back. We're just not going to work with them again. and sometimes you just have to say, okay, we learned a lesson and we just won't do that again. And so anyway, those are some of the things we've learned.
Interesting. This is a good question. It says, and I have dozens of questions here, so I apologize if I don't get to yours. But it says, so many young people care about justice and equality and want a sense of purpose related to that. Oh man, this just jumped. And they want to see that in their religion, but they don't always find it. They find it lacking. What would you have to say to them about how they can find that in their religion?
So different religions work toward this in different ways, but I find the principles that I commit to or the covenants that I make in the temple to really ground me in peace and justice. Because I can't go into a temple and then come back out and have made covenants about seeking the interest of my neighbor, of keeping the 10 Commandments, of being faithful to my spouse and to my children, about caring for the poor and working toward peace in Zion. Those are the main commitments that I make in the temple. And I walk out of those committed to say, I know there's a lot of stuff going on in my world, but I'm going to try and use my energy on these things. I don't think anything will transform society more quickly than those kinds of commitments. And they exist in other faiths as well, but for my faith, that's where I pull that. And then I can pour my energies into justice, unity, dignity, equality, and all of those things that I believe will make a just and peaceful Zion.
Terrific. This is a great question. What are shaping up to be the major humanitarian crises of the next 5 to 10 years? I imagine part of what you do is anticipatory, right? What's not just to react, but to anticipate what might be coming down the road. What are you seeing right now?
It's very common to say right now in the big multilateral circles that it's being driven by 3 C's. You've got climate change that's creating bigger climate shocks. You've got COVID, and even if it's not COVID, if it's another pandemic, which, they're worried about different kinds of things that are always on there, and then it's conflict. Those are the 3 things that are driving the situation to be out of bounds. And so I'm worried about those things. I want to learn the lessons of what we've learned from our past experiences. But there's a couple things I'm excited about, and one of them is there's been very exciting trials for the malaria vaccine. Now, it's still not very good. I think it's 60% effective and you need 4 shots. You're never going to get people, to come back for 4 shots. But what if...
people don't like shots?
Well, and 4 of them. But what if that actually became viable and we were able to control malaria? What that would do for human potential and the numbers of children that die from malaria every year, it would be a game changer. So the Gates Foundation is funding that. The church is also funding that, looking for the day when it becomes a reality. And so there are some things that I think are really exciting that are coming along.
I like that. So this one probably came from a business student. It says, one of the criticisms of a micro-enterprise type initiative like the chicken example is that more chickens will lead to a collapse in the price of chicken and eggs, right? And not actually to real sustainable development. So how do you address that as you think about it?
We need that kind of question.
Right.
Because when you're working in small economies, you have to be very aware of not hurting the economy that already exists. So if there's a flood and we ship in a bunch of clothing from the desert industries and we destroy their local market of used clothing, and so we've hurt them more than we help them. We think we're giving chickens, but we then drive the price down because there's too many chickens. So you need business students to be able to work in these locations and say, all right, what can we do that will create a balance so that there's beehives and goats and chickens, and all of those kinds of things so that we grow in a sustainable kind of way? The great, great question.
Let's just do a couple more. We're almost to 8:30. To some degree, you answered this already, but what role does education play in all of this? I mean, can just anybody do this, or do you need do we need mechanical engineers? Do we need business? So to what degree are specific skills needed in order to address some of these issues?
This is a wide-ranging question because I truly believe there's always things that we can do just as citizens that make a difference in our community. But there are also things that we need expertise for. And humanitarian itself requires some expertise in some of these very complicated situations so that we don't make it worse. What I don't think is always helpful, although it's the answer we want to hear, is that we will go in teams with our expertise and we will fly for 2 weeks to Cambodia. We will share our expertise and then we will come home. And we will feel really good about that. What is more helpful is to go and share expertise with your peers that are also studying those kinds of things and to allow a long-term relationship while they have questions over time to come up so that we're building up the regional and the local expertise in the very things that we're trying to do. That's way easier said than done. And sometimes it's accomplished by connecting peers with other peers. I think universities are very effective at exchanging this kind of expertise and knowledge. But it doesn't really happen when you're on vacation and you share a couple things that you know in the location where you are. It's more complicated than that. And so I hope that we can respect the expertise, work through institutions that are training up people over a long period of time, and then let's sponsor the ability for people in those locations to go to school and study that expertise so that they can be the people. One of the most impressive things I saw in Ethiopia were nurses that were from the region that was suffering from the famine who had been trained and then were coming back to help their own people. That's the kind of expertise we need the very most of.
Okay, 2 more questions. Again, I apologize if I didn't get to yours. You talked about this work as a kind of mutuality, of reciprocity. And so I think a really good question is, what have you learned? What have you brought back personally from some of these places that you've visited and people that you've met?
Early on in my career, I'm embarrassed to tell you this. I was teaching a principle and I was using a hard-boiled egg and you kind of crack off the shell and I was trying to use it as a visual principle for this. But in the process of what I was teaching, the egg gets soaked in alcohol. And I had a woman come up to me who had lived through a war and she said, "I hate that example that you used." I said, "What do you mean? It's so visual and people love it and they always come up and talk about it." She said, "It wastes the egg." Mm-hmm. And she said, "I lived through a war when eggs were as precious. We didn't see eggs for 6 months. And to see you soak that egg in alcohol, I just can't do it." So it was the first when we waste the thing that somebody needs very much. So that was an early lesson that I learned early on, to be respectful for the things that people need so much and not to waste.
Last question, and you've talked, and actually the last principle that you laid out was about your faith that God would address the things that we can't address. And so several of the questions here have just asked you to reflect on miracles that you've seen or ways that you feel, and I know we're at a state university here, but given your own experience and given who you are and your position, if you'd like to reflect at all about ways that you feel like there have been powers beyond your own that have helped you accomplish meaningful things.
I'll share 2 stories. One of them isn't my story. You saw that picture of Elder Ballard in that Ethiopian camp. It hadn't rained there for 2.5 years. And when they were in the feeding center, there was a man who arrived, and he had been walking 9 days to get there. And when he's walking on the road, he heard a baby crying, and he detoured off and went and found the baby's mother had died and was lying in the dirt, but the baby was still alive. So this old man, just emaciated, picked up the baby and walked into the feeding center. And he could have said, "I need help. I've come from 9 days." The first thing he said, Elder Ballard was telling the story, was, "What can be done for this baby? What she needs more help than I do. What can be done?" The reason I'm calling this a miracle is because he had every right in the extremity of his famine to be worried about himself. And I don't know how he felt the strength to care in that situation about somebody else, but I count that as a miracle. Because everything about Darwin's theory tells us it's going to be about me. And he somehow had that spark of divinity to say, it's still about this child. And I see that over and over again in people in extremity, where they're still willing to seek the the benefit of their neighbor in their worst moment, rather than fight and scrap, for kinds of things. And I really feel that as a spark of divine in people, and I really love that. And then, those people prayed in the hotel. They'd been to see all of those feeding centers. It was so difficult, and it really takes the energy out of you to be in those situations. And they prayed, and a thunderstorm came up and soaked the feeding center with rain. And it didn't alleviate their drought, but it was a message of hope. And in my own life, I have seen those little messages of hope that say, keep going. I'm aware of the situation. I'm aware of your work. And don't get discouraged. Keep going. And those are some of the most personal miracles in my own life.
Fantastic. Well, Sharon, thank you. Thank you on behalf of all of us. Again, we see so much of this on TV or on the internet, and it is easy to kind of to be overwhelmed by the world. But I love this message of hope, right? That there are people out there, that there are organizations out there who are working tirelessly to alleviate human suffering in all its forms. So thank you for everything you've done. Thank you for what you represent. Thank you for being here tonight with us and inspiring us tonight.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being here tonight. Appreciate it. Travel home safely, and we look forward to seeing you again. Thank you.
Thanks to everybody.